Hello and welcome to the Stack Magazine's podcast. My name is Stephen Watson and I run Stack, the subscription club that delivers a different independent magazine to your door every month. I'm very pleased to be joined for this episode by Anja Charbonneau, the founder of Broccoli magazine, and an independent publishing entrepreneur who seems to have a frankly ridiculous number of projects all up and running at the same time. All of them are dedicated to either creating or selling beautiful magazines, and all of them disprove that tired old idea that print is dead. So I think she makes the perfect guest for this, our very first episode of the new video podcast, which I have very mixed feelings about, and maybe we'll talk about that in a little bit. But Anja, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on this new journey.
I sort of hate it already, I've got to say, but we're going to get to that in a bit. So look, I mean, I sort of alluded to it in the introduction, but you do a frankly ridiculous amount of stuff. You've got so many magazines that you're working on. You've got so many kind of like initiatives that are up and running. I just sort of love watching it from a distance. But like maybe we should start at the beginning, and maybe you could tell us like how did you actually get into all this in the first place? How did you get into magazines?
Totally. So I mean, I've always loved books and print and magazines, and I used to cut out pictures from the big fashion magazines that I would buy at the grocery store and like never actually made the mental connection of like this is someone's job to make these images come to life. I sort of slowly found myself doing photography, so that was a kind of the back way in. I was working as a photographer when I applied for an art director job at Kinfolk, which was headquartered here in Portland back in the early 2010s. And that was kind of that first big wave of indie magazine, coming onto the scene. Like they really kind of paved the way for a lot of people. And I was working there as an art director, creative director for a few years, and decided to start my own magazine, even though I said I wouldn't ever want to do it while I was working there because it seemed very difficult. So Broccoli was our first magazine, which is now just the name of the publishing entity overall. And in Oregon at the time, cannabis was newly legal, and we saw an opportunity to make something really beautiful and creative to express this new era of the weed plant and this emergence in culture. So the first magazine we were making was Broccoli, and it was 3 times a year. We released it for 8 years, 20 issues. But in the middle, things got a little bit off the path. There was a moment when I thought we would be a weed media company. We had a podcast, we had a newsletter, we had all of these different, channels that would consist of this whole universe of like the creative weed scene we were trying to represent. But we broke the mold by releasing a book with an artist that we had collaborated with, an artist couple. I guess I can show it because we have some video. So Snail World was our first art book we released in 2020. And it's all of these really delightful miniatures where a snail is doing normal life things
I
like
love that
going
book
to the
so much.
office, having an embarrassing moment in the public toilet. Like there's it's just charming. So Aaliyah Murawski and Sam Copeland make these incredible dioramas and they put their pet snails on them and photograph it. And we had commissioned them to do work for Broccoli. And they had such a huge body of work. So I was like, do you guys want to make a book? Because we have the printer, we have the paper. Magazines and books aren't so different physically. So we were able to work with our same printer and everything. And that was like the first moment where it didn't necessarily make sense to be like, hello, we are Broccoli, a weed magazine, because now we had this other thing. And then a couple of years later, well, 1 year later, I guess it was, Mushroom People magazine came out. So it was our first full departure in the magazine space to explore a fully different subject. And it's all about fungi. I think a lot of people assume that it's about psychedelics because of the nature of Broccoli magazine, but that was really popular. And then that broke the system and broke the idea again, where now we're publishing more than one magazine, we're making books. But it really wasn't until probably 2 years ago, or maybe even a year and a half ago, where I started to believe like, okay, we actually are a publisher. We are not a
Mm,
magazine. We
mm,
are something different.
You're leading us to the big news of Broccoli beginning as this magazine and then like turning into something different, being a publisher, and then the news that kind of you announced earlier this year about you now not making Broccoli magazine anymore. So to tell us about that.
Yeah, so once we started getting to about issue 17, we had already dropped the release schedule for Broccoli Magazine to twice a year because 3 times a year is really, you don't ever stop. You're always making the next issue. And because we had these other projects, we needed more space to work on them, as you can imagine. So we started to back off a little bit. And then I could just feel the moment ending slowly. Like the hints were there that the weed moment that we were kind of riding with of this cultural shift was leveling out. It was normalizing, which on one hand was exactly what we were aiming for. We really wanted people to think about cannabis and be like, oh, what if it's just a plant? Some people use it, some people don't. It's no big deal. And that was the goal of the magazine. So the goal kind of got achieved depending on where you live and, what culture you're part of. From that perspective, it was getting harder to find interesting stories. The traditional media was not publishing articles about cannabis anymore.
Mm.
CBD had that huge rise and crash. It was everywhere, and then it was still there, but nobody talks about it. So there were a lot of little hints, like editorially, culturally. Our ad sales it was harder to sell ads because a lot of the investment money that originally went into the cannabis space had dried up because those VCs saw that they weren't going to make a profit from those investments. So there were a lot of little things like sparkling around that said, maybe it's time. And even though each issue was a little different, it was starting to feel for me really repetitive. And I like to be challenged and I like to creatively expand. And I wasn't feeling that editorially as the creative director. So we kind of had to make an early decision because, of course, we had subscribers too who were paying to get 2 issues a year. So I had to make the decision. There was like a critical moment where I needed to decide, are we going to keep doing it? Because we have to deliver this thing these people have paid for. I wanted to avoid refunds and just let it filter through the payments, through the issues, and then be done. So it released issue 20 in fall 2024. And I think that's like a really great place to end. 20
Mm.
is an awesome number. It's a nice round number. And, I think we like created this little time capsule of a moment in cannabis culture that will be something you can look back on, and I feel very proud of what we did, and it'll just be this little sliver of a moment in time.
Mm,
And I'm
mm, mm.
excited to see what people do next. I think that when maybe one day cannabis is federally legal in America, there might be like another bubbling up of excitement, but I think it's going to be kind of even keeled until then. So
Mm.
I felt
Yeah.
very free to then do other things, even though we were already doing them, but to give more time and more resources to other projects.
Okay, so come on, so tell us about these other things then. I should say actually, I heard you on the Full Bleed podcast, or maybe the Print is Dead podcast, and you were talking about expanding broccoli as like unlocking the Zelda map with different terrains and like kind of different objects and attributes. I just thought that is such a beautiful way of thinking about the things that you do. So tell us what are these new terrains that are opening up before you?
Well, it's fun because when you look at the library of what we've done, there isn't necessarily like a super speedy elevator pitch for what it is. Well, there's cats, there's mushrooms, there used to be weed, there's snails and tiny scenes, there's these other art books and the oracle decks that we make as well. Nature is obviously an underlying theme. And I think this one of the really lucky and special things is that it's been the same core 5 people working on broccoli since day one, issue one, same team, same editors, same designers. So I think that's like contributing to this little thread that runs through everything we make. But I'm like actually very happy with the timing of this because the music magazine we've been working on called Heartbeat is finally being proofread this weekend,
No
which is a
way.
huge weight lifted because it has been an extended production timeline for it and not something I'm learning that I actually really like it when things are more contained. When you let the production run too long, it starts to feel a little crazy and you stop remembering why you did it in the first place. So I'm very excited that it's almost done. We're tweaking the final cover, which has also been a real challenge for me on this. Anyway, but I'll explain what it is. So when the news came out about Pitchfork, but Pitchfork's still around, so I actually don't really know what that ever meant, that they were getting brought into GQ or some people got laid off. I don't know. But it sparked a discussion online about music media, what it meant to people, what kind of media they would hope to see on music. And I remember I got on Instagram stories and I was just kind of rambling about how it would be such a cool opportunity for someone to make a new music magazine. And then I didn't want to do it, but someone else could do it. Go to sleep next morning, chatting with Ellen and Stephanie, our editors, about what ideas we would have and how if we did it, we would want to include nature and sound and more scientific stuff and not just bands, not just producers, no reviews, no rankings, none of that. So it spiraled, the editorial chat spiraled, and I made a really quick decision to just do it. So we started production, we commissioned a lot of stories, and it's turning out exactly how I hoped it would, where the range of editorial in it is very surprising. And I love old stuff. I love nostalgia and I love uncovering secret treasures. So getting submissions from people who are like, I was a videographer in Seattle. Here's this shoegaze music video that never got made, but I have all these beautiful stills from it. Great, you're in. Or like a guy in West Michigan who collects punk flyers from the 90s. Great, done, you're in. Like we got some really, really special, fun, personal things. And we've been saying the whole time that the magazine is about music, sound, and emotion. So how the things we hear make us feel, whether it's like birds in the morning outside your window or a favorite album or, the sound of your grandma cooking in the other room. It's just so sensory. And I think that kind of approach was really, really fun to play with. And then it just took us forever to make, and now I'm really glad it's done, or 99% done.
So come on. So what's the story with the cover? Why is this one proving so hard? You've done so many covers.
So it turns out music is invisible and therefore very hard to represent visually. I think that I was very challenged creatively by the art direction because the submissions weren't as thrilling as sometimes we get for other things. Like the Mushroom People issue 2, incredible submissions. I barely had to commission any art for it because what we got was so strong and interesting. Because you can just take a mushroom and do something interesting with it. You cannot really take sound and show it to people unless, you're taking it very literally, like sound waves or the sort of classic like pictures of musicians and artists. But sometimes those photos aren't very exciting because it's just a portrait. Maybe it's a great portrait, but it's not like conceptual. And we do a lot of conceptual art in what we do. So the cover was a real struggle because sometimes you have a cover and sometimes you don't. And this is just something that I'm trying to make peace with over time. With each project, I have my fingers crossed, like, please let this be one where we just have a cover and it's not scary.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
we did not have a cover. So we've tried a lot of different things and I kind of sat with a placeholder cover for a very long time. And here we are, it's like last minute and we think we've got it. But then I'm like, I don't think we've got it. So I actually ended up digging through like archival photos relating to sound on Getty, which is like a last resort for me to go to like, well, actually, we have actually licensed a lot of like old pre 80s or older stock photography, not stock, but like old licensable photography because it's a very nostalgic project. So having these older images, even if it's just sort of something generic, not necessarily of a specific person, but like a weird shell or like a splash in a pond, like all of those images are old. So it wasn't totally a reach to then like turn to like the big final boss of image licensing, but that website is a beast. There's, millions of images on there. But I found something really cool that's very broccoli style. And as soon as I saw it, I was like, this could work.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I'm kind of excited that that's how it turned out, even though it was very painful to get there, because it feels like something, yeah, a treasure unearthed, something we could not have created. If we made that same image now, it wouldn't have that like, yeah, that burnished quality to it. It's a little dustier than what we would be able to make. And I just didn't want to spend money on something that I knew would not work, commissioning like, okay, anytime I've had a mad dash for a cover and I've last minute commissioned a shoot and try to solve it by throwing money at it, it almost always disappoints. So I try to not do that. So I took a very scenic route to finding our image for this
Oh,
cover, and
amazing.
I hope people like it.
I can't wait to see it. I can't wait to see this new magazine and particularly the cover. I'm really interested in a thing that you just said then about, the like this cover, this image being like very broccoli style. And, as you say, like the number of things that you're doing now it's all like really quite different from each other. All the magazines are different, the Oracle decks, the books, and yet there is somehow this very broccoli style. Like, what is that? How can you define what that is?
Well, from the very beginning, I remember saying in an early broccoli interview that our visual aesthetic really lies between beautiful and strange. We're like tiptoeing down that path. And I think that has remained true with everything we do. But I think also through the design, like the way that JJ designs, Jennifer Wright, she's been the primary designer on most of our projects. And then also Alice Maydew started working with kind of mid broccoli era. And they're both such thoughtful, sensitive designers that they bring this level of detail. And there's, I think also maybe because it's an all women team, there is like a bit of femininity added to things and like little flourishes. And we get punchy sometimes, like Catnip has a big, bold title, but even still, there's like a softness to what we do. So there's these kind of contrasts, right? Like the, oh, that's really pretty, but like it's a little weird, or oh, that's really like soft, but it has a bit of an edge. I think that's kind of where it lies. Like there's a little bit of juxtaposition, but I just love things that are kind of fairy tale, like storybook, but made more modern. It's kind of like any broccoli thing. It's been left to sit for a while. It's like if you took something and put it in the woods and then you come back in a few months and see how it's doing, or like something that you'd find on a thrift store shelf, there's like a sense of there's time has passed since this thing would have been new or modern. I think we do that well, like kind of bringing that nostalgic sense through the design. And that's just me being, a lifelong vintage lover and being raised at flea markets and thrift stores. So that one's
Totally.
baked in.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And so there are all these like projects that you've got going on. So there are the magazines, the books, the Oracle decks you've talked about. So as well as there being this kind of aesthetic that unites it all, they're all print things. And that seems to be very important to broccoli. So why is print so important to you and what you do?
It's twofold. So there's like the creative answer, which is that, of course, it's so wonderful to hold something real, to see something you've worked on turned into a thing that then other people can hold and appreciate. And, people always love to comment on like the soft finish. That's a very popular finish. If you're making a magazine, use that soft touch coating. It will delight people. The smell, in Catnip, excuse me, in Catnip, we did some really fun, like the cat paw prints on the cover have really earned their keep. People at events will see them like, oh, they're like, something's on this one. And then when they realize what it is, that little surprise is really fun. So getting to do stuff like that is very satisfying. And then on the more like businessy side, it's just all the same materials. So you don't have to learn how to make something new every time you want to make something new. And that was a big struggle we had when we were trying to figure out how do we have more sources of revenue and more streams coming in to help support the magazine. Of course, merch, easy, one would think is easy. But yeah, you're learning to make, how do you make socks? How do you make a water bottle? How do you know how many t-shirts to print in a certain size and what vendors do you use? So the barrier to entry to these object creation was so much higher than like continuing along the path that we already knew. We're
Hmm.
working with the same printer for 8 years. I know what they can make. And it's also really great for shipping because everything is flat. And although they are quite fragile, you wouldn't expect a book or a magazine to be so, glass-like, but you really have to pack them well. But I think that's like, yeah, that's it. It's sad, and it's so satisfying to see them on the shelf together.
Totally, yeah. So your printer that you work with is in China, I think?
That's right.
And so that is, I think that's quite unusual in the independent magazine world. I think of independent magazines and I think of people printing more locally to where they are and sending out. So what was it that put you onto China in the first place?
Well, I had one experience at Kinfolk. They made a set of boxed greeting cards with a Chinese printer, and just seeing the pricing was really enlightening to know that you can do so much with not a lot of funds. So the very first issue I printed actually with the same printer that we used because I had a contact. I mean, it's very daunting to think, okay, there's thousands upon thousands probably printers in Shenzhen and these other cities that are the manufacturing hubs. Who do you pick? So we picked one. And then, I was like, okay, the price is pretty good. And my husband, he runs his own business and he often orders equipment, manufacturing equipment from China. And he's like, I can get you something better on Alibaba. And he just got on there, found, the listing. It probably said high quality glossy magazine. We got a sample. It was great. And we went with it. And it was a really random choice, but they're an awesome company and they can make so many beautiful things. And it's really enabled us to, honestly, for the business to exist because we can make something for a lot less than what you would pay in Canada or Europe or America. And I don't think we'd be in the same position of still existing at this point if our printing was so expensive. And I think it is a higher barrier to entry. And you also need to be printing, a certain number of copies to make it worthwhile because you're paying to then ship them on a boat, and that's not cheap either. So there's like a tipping point, I think, for publishers of when it makes sense, but it can really help grow what you're doing. Then you
Mm.
can make more.
Yeah, yeah. I was thinking, I feel like maybe it was like in our Discord server or something. I feel like I saw someone saying, "Oh, you should make calendars," and you were like, "Ah, no, calendars go out of date too quickly." And that just really like opened my eyes to it because we've made calendars before, and yeah, they go out of date really quickly. Like basically, once you're a couple of months into that year, nobody wants that calendar anymore. It doesn't matter
Right.
how lovely the thing is, and it just sort of made me go like, "Oh, that's actually a whole like philosophy of publishing, which actually I suppose goes hand in hand with printing something in China, which means it might take a while to get to you. But then once you've got it, you've got this product that you can still be selling years later. I mean, that you talked about Snail World, like are you still selling Snail World in the
Oh
shop?
yeah. Yeah, and then we made the sequel, Snail World 2. So like what you're getting to is the evergreen nature of these things. And magazines I don't think people think of as being necessarily evergreen products because you're used to them coming out sequentially. I get it once a month, or like I get it 4 times a year. And releasing Mushroom People in 2021, we've been selling it for years. We didn't make the second one until 2024 it came out. And to see that like Mushroom People held its spot in our top selling products, both for us and for our retailers for years, that was very enlightening because then suddenly your return on what you've invested into making it is so much stronger than if you had kicked it out, kicked it off the shelves 6 months later for another one. And this is something that I've been talking to a lot of other publishers lately and telling them like free yourself from the idea of a release schedule because mostly your audience isn't paying attention. If they are, sort of, they're getting it wrong half the time. We will always get emails from people being like, I didn't get my July copy of Broccoli. I'm like, that's because there isn't one. And they just assume that it's coming every month, right? So I think the reader will be happy when it comes, as long as you're not overpromising and not delivering. Like, they're paying for it, they're not getting it. That's different. But if you have the freedom to set your own schedule, do it because unless you're very, very rich, you're going to run out of money very fast if you're putting it out on a regular basis and you're not giving the thing a chance to find its audience or find its readers. Even 4 years later, or I guess 5 years, yeah, 4 years later, we're doing events and people are picking up Mushroom People. They're seeing it for the first time. Same with the books. I mean, Snail World is still one of the most popular things we have because it's so fun and it's so novel. And even with the sequel, it's not the same where it's like nobody wants issue one because issue two is here. Although it's interesting, I find that like with magazines, people do want issue one, two, three. Once you get to four, people are like, I have enough. And they're not, then that sort of filters out who your real, like, who are the diehard fans and the diehard readers that are going to keep going with you. Or maybe people are like, I started with four, so I'll get four, five, six. And then you don't really know much about what's going to happen after that. Like there's a natural churn in rate to a reader and a subscriber that you can't count on them forever, but it will be like like a changing of the guard of who the readers are every once in a
Brilliant.
while. And that's both interesting and also a little scary if you're planning on making something that you put out once a year, you put out twice a year. I'm like, just slow down. You don't have to
Totally.
do it that way.
And that this all for me is speaking to like the difference between publishing as a small independent and publishing as a corporate publisher. So, if you're a corporate publisher, maybe you have advertisers who need their adverts to be out at a particular time, and so that's a deadline you have to work with. Or like maybe you want to sell in supermarkets, and supermarkets insist on turning over their product, so you have to be publishing regularly. Whereas when you're on the independent side, like those forces just don't exist. You're probably not selling in a supermarket. You probably don't have advertisers, or if you do, they're maybe a little bit more flexible with when things come out. So it's almost like you're kind of figuring out, like, okay, so what are the rules of being an independent publisher? And rather than just following the kind of stuff that we've learned from a different model of publishing.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, we have advertisers in our titles, but we don't talk to them until we know it's going to happen. You know, they're not booking 2 issues, 3 issues at a time. It's like a one-time thing. And I found actually that it's sometimes confusing for people, like making the music magazine. A lot of people are like, "Oh, we'll catch you on the next one." It's like there probably won't be a next one, especially if you don't help us now, there won't be a next one. But that strategy is, yeah, it's its own thing. But yeah, we know with like distribution, we're on a couple grocery store shelves, but only temporarily. And I think that something that I'm finding an interesting disconnect with is the way that magazine distribution works, even on an independent level, doesn't quite align with this sort of evergreen model we're playing with right now because they don't know when to pull the magazines off the shelf to do their sales tallies. If you give them something in January, the next one comes out in July, they're like, great, July, we'll get those ones off. We'll tell you how many you sold, the new ones out there. But if you put something out there and then it doesn't have an off shelf date like catnip, and then they're like, oh, well, can we have more? And you're like, yeah, but how many have we sold? And they're like, well, we don't know. Or do you want us to pull back all of the other ones? I'm like, well, I don't know, because eventually they'll sell. So there's this kind of confusing thing that I'm finding with that model that I don't love, but it's also quite a smaller part of what we're doing. So it's not something we're really relying on. It's kind of just like cool for reaching the networks that we don't have personally and the networks that only buy through distributors. Even though it's a little bit experimental, I kind of always believe like what you do through distribution is an experiment.
Mm,
If you go
mm,
traditional,
mm.
you may not sell anything and you'll find out later. So you need to be okay with getting nothing back or getting a little bit back and being okay with that uncertainty.
So in that case, is that kind of effectively like a marketing expense for you? Like you kind of go, okay, look, we're going to put these magazines out there. We might not make money back off that, but it's just good because then people are out and seeing them in the world.
Yeah, I mean, we have a pretty decent sell through, but in like comparison to what we sell through our website or through like direct sales to retailers where they're just buying it wholesale, paying us right away, the distribution is small. But absolutely, it's like because they're based in the UK, to be on those newsstands is really fun for us. Even a lot of the magazine stores, like they're only buying through distributors. So that's your way in. And it's such a cool exposure to international audiences. We work with one in Seattle too that does kind of, that's how we get in the grocery store that I can go and look at in person. So that's fun. But yeah, they kind of have their very specific niches of who they serve, how they serve them. And it's good, but it's not everything.
Mm, mm, mm. So I said in my introduction that everything you do is around either making or selling these beautiful magazines, because you have now introduced a new kind of function of broccoli, I guess, where you're taking all of this like hard-earned knowledge and starting to use it with other publications. So maybe tell us a little bit about what's going on with that.
For sure. Yeah, we've been doing a little bit of consulting, which is so fun because we just get to have interesting conversations with people. And we've done a bit of distribution, like experimentation with Calling All Horse Girls, which is a magazine for people that love horses. Very fun. Very similar to Broccoli in its approach editorially of very dynamic, different stories. The design sort of changes each issue. Really colorful, playful. I love it. I'm not even necessarily a horse person, but it's a great magazine. And then, of course, our colleague Ellen, who you've interviewed before, has Mildew Magazine, which is a secondhand fashion magazine. And she went off on her own to do this. She still works with us, obviously. And then I think she was explaining this on a past Stack episode that now Broccoli is acting as a publisher for Mildew. So we're paying all the expenses. We are like in charge of the distribution, in charge of the sales, storing it at the fulfillment center, the warehouse. And Ellen is the editor. She gets to make her magazine, same designer, same collaborators. They can do whatever they want. The only thing I told her I want an opinion on is the cover because it is so critical for sales. So we've been just actually figuring that out. She's been in town in Portland, and we're like, I think we've landed on which one we want to go with, which is fun. So that's really cool for us because it's part of that like expanding dream of being a publisher to be able to publish someone else's dream. And for Ellen, like we know each other so well, so to be able to take that risk together feels very safe compared to if it was a total stranger. I mean, imagine having that conversation with someone that you don't know well, like, actually, I don't think you can use this as a cover. And they're like gutted, right? Because it's the one they wanted. So I don't love having that kind of conversation, but with Ellen, we're like, well, what do you think? Like we have these creative conversations all the time. And then of course, like we don't know if it will end up turning a profit. So we've had to kind of work together to come up with the hypothetical situation where we'll find out, 6 to 9 months after it's on sale, if it's selling enough that we can like split profits. Because will there be any? I don't know. Will it be worth it for Broccoli? Will it be worth it for Ellen? We don't know. But the fact that we have this relationship foundation makes that kind of project possible. And then if it works for that, then it does open up systems where we can like apply it to other people's magazines and feel a little more secure in what it could turn out to be.
Because it feels like you're also almost becoming like a bit of a kind of like industry leader or something. Like the you have Publishing Dreams, which I think is on Substack. It's like so basically an email newsletter, which is you and Ellen and Stephanie like writing about this whole process of making magazines and distributing and so what's behind that kind of desire to open up that side of what you do?
Well, we were making, oh, there's a blog on our website, but of course, if you have a blog on your website, no one sees it. So we were putting our pitch calls there because originally we would send out our pitch calls only through email. And for some reason, I think our email, you can't link to a page, to see it later. So we're like, okay, we need to put this somewhere where you can show someone after the fact, here is all the information. So we were using our website's blog with that function. And, it was over the Christmas holiday. I was scrolling around on Substack, kind of like trying to dig in and read a little more there. And, almost everything I was clicking into, the writer was mentioning something about print. Oh, I just love magazines, I miss magazines, or, these different sentiments, whatever. If it was magazine related or not, print was present. And I think, of course, it makes sense because a lot of the people there are writers. So they like books, they like things that have words. So I was just thinking, like, oh, this seems like a good place to be both like duplicating what we're putting on our website in terms of pitch calls, maybe a good way to find new writers in the same way that we use Instagram to put out our art submission calls and try to reach new visual artists that way. So it's been a good platform because I think it's the right audience base. They seem to be interested in things like this. And I have to kind of hold myself back sometimes on their version of Twitter because they have like a notes. They're called notes. It's very much just like their Twitter. And every so often someone will say, well, I just wish that Substack would just take pieces from all these different writers and like release them as a zine. I'm like, that's just a magazine and we have those already. We literally have magazines. And I always tell when I do reply to those comments, I say, just go look at Stack, look at Mag Culture. Like you'll find that there are many magazines out there and you'll very likely find something that's quite tailored to your interests. And I think people just don't necessarily realize, especially in America, because magazines aren't often carried in the stores that we're going to, at least not good ones. So it's funny. But yeah, Substack's been kind of fun and it's an interesting spot for us to like express these things that we really care about, go deeper to kind of help answer the questions that people always ask when we're doing things like pitch calls. And just, it helps us hone our reason for doing things.
Mm,
You
mm,
have to,
mm.
if you have to write it down and make it make sense, and edit it and have three people agree that this is yes, this is why we're doing it, then it's just a good exercise, if anything. But it's been
100%.
fun.
If you want to know what you think about something, write it down, and then the you're not allowed any lazy assumptions. Then, like, if you've actually got to put the words on the page. So that I was saying at the start that, like, I'm very conflicted about the idea of a video podcast because, like, I just like podcasts. Like, I like the fact that it's just RSS. If you subscribe to it, you get it nice and easy. But obviously that's not the way that our world works now. And, you need ways of, like, drawing people to your content. Like, sort of like you saying, like, it's not enough to just have the blog. You needed to use Substack as a way to actually get that stuff out. So basically part of the point of this is, now we're going to have nice shareable videos that we can put out on social media and hopefully bring more people to these conversations that we're having, which is relevant for you because you're one of the few people who I think managed to do a good job of TikTok, which, I mean, I still can't bring myself to do the sort of, like, my face in a TikTok video, but you seem to have, like, mastered it. Did you just jump in?
It's it was for I forced myself to. Maybe that doing this podcast will show you that it's not that hard. It's the same thing. It's hard at first and it feels so awkward if you're not used to doing it. But like you can edit them. I'm editing all my clips. If you could see how many times sometimes it takes me to get a sentence out, it's like I'm just staring off into space because I can't get it out there. But then after you do it a few times, it becomes more comfortable. And I think because we've been using it to share pitch calls, it's like opportunities for writers and artists that has gotten us some traction. And then, you can reply to people in videos and there's a little bit of a feedback system that helps and like gets it out there. But it wasn't easy. It was quite painful and awkward. But I think it's been good because one of the interesting things of shifting from being Broccoli, the weed magazine, weed company, into publisher, we've had to like change our marketing and we've had to sort of rebrand in a way, at least in the way that we're talking about ourselves. You've got to change. It's not a magazine for cannabis lovers anymore. Now it's, well, we're a publisher of unusual delights. And you kind of have to like bring that part of that audience along with you. There are some people I'm sure that are like, I wasn't interested unless it was about weed, like goodbye. And that's fine. That's totally fine. And then figuring out ways to then market as a publisher has been interesting because it never really worked for us to share stories from the magazine. Like people always would have rather seen a cute weed accessory versus like learning about a story in the magazine. But that picture of the pipe would make them buy the magazine. So there's like this back, not logical path of getting people interested. And I think, with the way that it feels like anybody can learn to do anything now, people love to see behind the scenes. They love to hear about how you do things. And that's like both good and challenging for me on that side of like expressing what we do because I can't like make the magazine in front of you, you know?
Mm-hmm,
I could
mm-hmm,
show me
mm-hmm.
typing emails, but people are not interested in watching me perform a task online, which is fine. So
You've
I need
tried that,
to,
right?
I've tried, honestly, I have. I'm like, clean up my studio with me, and like, no one cares. So it's fine. But I have to, hold the thing and show it and flip through it and kind of try every tactic I can visually to present what we're doing. But I think the fact that we have quite an open door for people to get involved in one way or another if they're artists or writers or a lot of people want to design but we're like we're good on design. That door's still a little bit closed because we're obsessed with our designers. But yeah, I think that like openness, and that's always been part of the Broccoli ethos, like we've always had a very, I try to answer every email I get, like, which is maybe not the best idea all the time, but we're accessible, in both editorially and like logistically in the emails, online, like it's always been available. But it's definitely been weird translating the old Broccoli, which was never about the company, it was more about the message and the people involved, the community. Now it's a lot more about the company because the message is what print is cool. Like it's not necessarily something that for a lot of people it's emotional. I think for us it's emotional, but we're not like, I don't know, there isn't that like drama that the weed stuff had. And that kind of like cultural moment isn't necessarily a thing that people relate to print as much. So instead, it's talking about how it's made. And I definitely would encourage other people to try doing that because people are curious, and like
Mm-hmm.
to learn who's behind the stuff they make. It's always fun to know. I follow like a hair clip brand called Chunks. I've never bought their products. I don't really use hair clips, but I really love seeing their stuff because I get to learn about their production. I get to see their warehouse. Like, I like it. And I think it's just the strategies have to keep changing.
Yeah, totally. Well, I mean, look, you've changed your whole company, but also meanwhile, the internet and the world are changing around it as well. So you have to keep on changing in response to the way that people are using things and paying attention to things. Okay, are we at the point now then where you said Heartbeat is going through its final checks? So when can we expect to see that coming out?
I expect it to be out in October, maybe the end of September, depending. But we are going to go to IndieCon, which I'm very, very excited about now. And I'm going to fly over a few copies to our warehouse so that we can bring it because it would be too frustrating to be like 3 weeks off of the timing. So we'll just like pay a little extra and get some there. So I'm really happy that's going to finally come out.
Amazing. Okay, so worldwide launch at IndieCon in Hamburg in September. So, what about the rest of the year? What are your other, like, kind of big tentpole things that you have happening this year?
Yes, so we are working on Catnip 2, which is a big deal. It'll be out next spring. So we have a lot of the writing commissioned already. I'm going to do a big art call for it. We'll also have some moments where people can just like send in a picture of their cat because we did this sort of cat yearbook in the first one and had, pre-launch catnip readers, send in send in pictures of their cats. So they're all there. So we'll do something like that. There's a couple like audience participation moments coming for that one. Um, and then, it's interesting because almost have like, we've almost overdone it with how many projects we have in process because we have a couple art books ready to go. We need to start design. We have Bethany Van Rijswijk, who we collaborate with a lot. We have a big art book we're making with her, but we just like don't have enough design time basically. And we have this cool fairy tale themed deck coming out. I can show it right there. That's the next one in that series. We commissioned writing and I did a big art submissions call for like a sun and moon themed magazine where the structure is like sun one side, moon the other side, eclipse in the middle,
Uh,
which will be cool. Um, but I think catnip is going to overtake the cats are going to overtake the heavens, and we need to do that one first because it does have a date we've promised people when it will come out. So we have a bunch of that stuff going on, bunch of art books. And I'm at the point right now where I've been having conversations with artists that we want to publish with, where I'm like, let's talk in September when I've cleared the plate because the things that are waiting, you don't want them to get to that point where they feel stagnant and suddenly you like lose interest in making it. So we have a big plate to clear before we
mm.
can really start any new ideas. And then we've had the conversation as well, like, okay, what will be the next big 200-page magazine next? And I'm not sure yet what it'll be, but you just never know when inspiration will strike. And then you go on the crazy editorial rants, and then suddenly it's happening.
Well, okay, in your world, that's what happens. It's a very specific way of going about it.
Yeah,
Listen,
we
Anya,
enable each other in bad ways.
it's so lovely talking to you about this stuff. I find it so like inspiring and energizing. So, thank you very much for taking the time out to talk about it. Yeah, really good luck with bringing it all out into the world.
Thank you so much.